Hello, firefighters. I know it's only been 6 weeks. Doesn't it feel like 6 months? I've really missed you all, and it's good to be back, and thank you for joining us. Even though I've been filming Grace and Frankie, and we have long hours, I really haven't stopped thinking about our fire drill family and the urgency of the climate crisis. I mean, it's hard not to, right? We have terrible fires and heat here in California, and lakes and reservoirs have shrunk to almost nothing. Dozens have died in the states of Oregon and Washington from record heat. 486 people have died in British Columbia. Starfish and mussels have literally cooked to death in tidal pools in the Northwest. This is real, folks. This is real. Last week, California Governor Gavin Newsom, his administration denied 21 fracking permits. It's a move that the governor's office described Friday as the beginning of the end for fracking in the states, and it's a good step, and we celebrate it, but it's not nearly enough. While we're celebrating this announcement, let's also encourage Governor Newsom to follow this action with additional steps to speed up and phase out fossil fuels and protect frontline communities from neighborhood drilling. This has to start with a moratorium on new drilling within 2,500 feet of homes, schools, and other sensitive sites. Another update from our time away is Greenpeace UK's sting operation involving two of Exxon's veteran lobbyists. The staffers posed as headhunters, recruiting high-level oil lobbyists for new opportunities abroad. The secretly recorded and now released statements from Exxon are nothing short of extraordinary. These Exxon tapes uncovered what climate activists have long suspected. Exxon's climate change strategy is to contain and delay aggressive climate action so they can increase oil and gas production well into the future. The lobbyist revealed, quote, "Did we aggressively fight against some of the science? Yes." And then went further. Did we join some shadow groups to work against some of the early efforts? Yes, that's true. In news interviews, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez called it shameful and said this is serious because this is talking about whether our basic democratic rights can be purchased. Congressman Ro Khanna of California, chairman of the House Environment Subcommittee of Oversight, demanded big oil CEO, including Exxon, testify in front of Congress about their climate disinformation campaigns and was prepared to issue subpoenas if the CEOs didn't come voluntarily. These stunning leaks from Exxon's top lobbyists should serve as a wake-up call for members of Congress and policymakers at every level of government. Effective climate action is not complete without policies that strike directly at the power of the oil industry. Right now, we have a critical window to pass an infrastructure package that eliminates subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. You know, since we last talked, the End Fossil Fuel Subsidies campaign has been heating up. Over 500 groups signed a letter to congressional leadership urging Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to do whatever it takes to eliminate fossil fuel handouts this year. There was a rally in front of the Capitol last month, and the nationwide coalition plans to escalate the pressure this August when Congress goes home for summer recess. You're going to have to stay tuned with us to find out exactly what's going to happen in August so you can participate. The next few months are critical. Congress plans to finish writing and voting on major climate legislation in September. You can bet we'll be following this very closely and keeping the pressure on. We'll talk more about all of this with our guests later in the show, but before we get further into it, should we have some good news? Let me see if I still know how to work my little handy xylophone. Okay, good news coming. The Biden administration says it's canceling or reviewing a host of actions by the Trump administration to roll back protections for endangered or threatened species, with a goal of strengthening a landmark law while addressing climate change. And Germany's greenhouse gas emissions are to be net zero by 2045, as Chancellor Angela Merkel's cabinet has approved a new climate roadmap, which includes cutting emissions by 65% by the end of this decade, spending more on renewable energy sources, and tougher financial penalties for polluters. Always need some good news. Today, we have an important and inspiring leader joining us, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, chair of the Progressive Caucus and representative for Washington State's 7th District. A former Washington State senator and a lifelong organizer for immigrant, civil, and human rights, Representative Pramila Jayapal was recently re-elected to Congress for a third term with more votes than any member of the House of Representatives. In 2016, she became the first South Asian American woman ever elected to the House. She came to the United States alone at the age of 16 and went on to start the largest immigrants' rights organization in Washington State before becoming one of only 14 immigrants serving in Congress today. As the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Representative Jayapal is the lead sponsor of the Medicare for All, the College Act for All, the Housing is a Human Right Act, the Ultra-Millionaire Tax Act, and the Roadmap to Freedom Immigration Resolution. She's busy, in other words. She currently serves on the Judiciary, Budget, and Education and Labor Committees. We are really excited to have Congresswoman Jayapal on the show. She's a true climate champion. The Congresswoman is chair of the mighty Progressive Caucus in Congress, also known as CPC. Last year, the CPC released a report detailing their key pillars for climate progress. These pillars include centering justice for frontline communities who've borne the brunt of environmental, economic, and racial injustice, and making public investments commensurate with the urgency and magnitude of the climate crisis. The report also recommends that Congress fund the national climate response by eliminating all tax breaks, financial assistance, royalty relief, direct federal research and development, and many loopholes that benefit the fossil fuel industry. At a recent Our Revolution virtual rally, Congresswoman Jayapal said that subsidizing the fossil fuel industry is, quote, a huge waste of taxpayer money, and it's so harmful to our climate, unquote. And she said that ending fossil fuel subsidies is a top 5 priority for progressive lawmakers. Well, that's music to our ears right here at Fire Drill Fridays. And we applaud the Congresswoman for pushing so hard for the climate policies we all deserve. Earlier this year, the Congressional Progressive Caucus released a number of priorities for the recovery package for the caucus to fight for. This includes things like a clean energy standard, the EJ40, which calls for 40% of benefits to go to environmental justice communities, a climate jobs program like a civilian conservation corps coming out of a youth movement, particularly the Sunrise Movement. And it includes renewable energy investments and energy efficiency to stay within the 1.5 degrees Celsius target defined by the Paris Treaty. It's great to see the CPC's commitment to transitioning away from fossil fuels and towards a clean, renewable energy economy. Welcome, Congresswoman. I know how busy you are. Thank you for taking time to be with us today.
It's a real honor to be with you, Jane, and with the movement for Fire Drill Fridays. And it couldn't be more important at this moment where we really do have a path ahead of us where one road will take us the right way and one road will take us the wrong way. So it's up to us as activists, I think, wherever we sit, to help influence that path.
Very well said. You know, I'm guessing that there are some people in our audience who aren't familiar with the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Can you explain to our fire drillers what the CPC is and what it takes to become a member?
Yes, absolutely. So the CPC, think of it as organizing on the inside. So we are very proud to have 96, about to be 97 members of the Democratic Caucus who are part of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And it originally started as about 20 years ago with Senator Bernie Sanders, Maxine Waters, Pete DeFazio, a couple of others. And it was really almost like a social club. People who had a certain progressive ideology got together and were trying to figure out how to move things in a more progressive direction. But over time, as the CPC has grown, and since I was co-chair 2 years ago, this year I'm the sole chair, we have really tried to bring more structure to it so that we can leverage the votes of our 96 members to push in a direction that we need to push. And so we passed a whole set of rules reforms last year that says that if you're a CPC member and if you want to become a CPC member, you have to be willing to sign on to a certain percentage of what we call our flagship bills. So flagship bills are like some of the ones that you mentioned already that I'm lead sponsoring. We have climate bills that are part of our flagship bills. You have to sign on to those bills as co-sponsor. But also when it comes time to significant votes, if the CPC takes a position to say we will not vote for this package, for example, without our climate pieces that we've identified, and if that vote passes by a 2/3 margin of our members, that everyone is then asked to vote with the CPC, the majority, supermajority of the time. That is kind of a remarkable thing because we're binding votes to the collective position of the caucus. And that really hasn't been done before. And we've been able to use it in very, very significant ways. And even just to move the whole push for a reconciliation package rather than a bipartisan package, 7 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago now, probably, the CPC and I as the leader said, our members will not vote for a bipartisan package without a simultaneous agreement and movement and passage of the reconciliation package that has all of our 5 CPC priorities, one of which you articulated is a very bold climate priority. So many of our members, I think it was almost 2/3 of our members voted to say that. And so we were then able to go to the Speaker, to the Senate Majority Leader, and to the White House and say, our members will not vote for this bipartisan package without the full reconciliation package with our priorities in there. And now, of course, you see the Speaker, the Senate Majority Leader, and even the White House are saying the same thing. We're not going to be able to pass the bipartisan package unless we address this, because we're not going to leave out climate. We're not going to leave out care economy. We're not going to leave out healthcare. These are the critical priorities for the CPC.
Well, we are so grateful. What a power you've created there. That's just really important. Can you share more of the CPC's priorities on climate?
Yes. So you mentioned, and I should say that even last year, at the end of last year, before we moved into the session, the CPC introduced the People's Agenda. And we did this along with a number of groups, movement groups from Move On, Indivisible, the Poor People's Campaign, a number of others that came together to create the People's Agenda for this next year of Congress. And that is really a roadmap that not only puts people first, but centers working people, poor people, young people, Black, Brown, immigrant, Indigenous, LGBTQ+, and those who have been left out and left behind for too long. So within that, there are 7 priorities. The first was expansive COVID relief that meets the scale of the crisis and takes on disproportionate harm to Black, Indigenous, people of color, and other vulnerable communities. The second is putting people back to work, giving workers more power, and transitioning to a clean energy economy by investing in many of the things that we've now even given more definition to for the jobs and families package. The third is ensuring healthcare for everyone. The fourth is expanding voting rights and getting money out of politics. The fifth is dismantling racism and inequality in all institutions to create justice, ensure equality and opportunity for all. And within that is creating a humane and just immigration system, something you know I've worked very hard on my whole life. The sixth is ending endless wars and investing in diplomacy. So we're not sapping our communities of much needed investments and fueling wars and acts of war abroad. And the seventh is ending corporate greed and corporate monopolies. So there is a lot of intersection, obviously, with all of these, and certainly with climate. There are several of those pieces, including immigration, if you think about migration more broadly, and how we ensure that we protect people from the necessity to migrate because of the climate crisis. So we're very proud of that agenda, specifically drilling down to climate change. On this next recovery package, we are, as you said, prioritizing clean energy standard and putting aside the money that it will take to really make that a reality. We are prioritizing EJ40, environmental justice, so that 40% of our investments go to frontline communities. And we are prioritizing ending the fossil fuel subsidies, the tax system that really perpetuates all of this. And when you look at the enormous amount of money that has gone to subsidizing oil and gas companies that are taking fossil fuels out of the ground, that is creating the incentive for this to continue. And so that is obviously a big priority for us as well. And then, as you said, the Civilian Climate Corps, and really putting particularly our young people, everyone back to work with great union jobs to deal with climate resiliency and climate change and climate justice.
God, what a country we'd be when we enact all that. Thank you. Now we know that the science is compelling and backs up the need for bold climate action. Can you share what the obstacles are as you work to be climate leaders? What stands in your way?
Yeah, well, I think you are very aware because of your Fire Drill Fridays of this, and I know all of our fire drillers are as well. The giant corporate oil and gas lobby stands in our way. They have exerted an enormous amount of power over lawmakers with corporate contributions. Jane, I don't take any corporate PAC contributions. I haven't since the day I ran for Congress. At that time, I was one of, I think, only 4 members of Congress to not do that. Today, thanks to End Citizens United and other groups, we've been able to increase the number of members of Congress that don't do that. But that is a massive thing that stands in the way. And so the only way to beat that is for the grassroots movement to really rise up. And of course, we are trying to get big money, dark money out of politics and out of our democracy. We've been very clear. We need to end corruption. We need to end the dominance of big money and corporate interests. We need to eliminate secret corporate spending in elections. And we need a public campaign financing system. So there is, within that, HR 1, the For the People Act, goes a long way to doing that. Elizabeth Warren and I also have another much more comprehensive bill to get money out of politics and to really transform accountability in elections. But also, Jane, we need to protect the right to vote. This is really critical. Many of the things we're talking about affect Black, Indigenous, Brown communities and poor communities, and the Republican-led attacks on voting rights have been undermining the ability for those communities to vote, directly targeting those communities. And so if we are going to make this a reality, we have to pass the For the People Act, we have to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and that brings us to a second big obstacle, which is the Jim Crow filibuster and ending Mitch McConnell's ability to essentially give the tyranny of the minority, the power to block everything that the people need and want. So that's why I and the Progressive Caucus are leading my colleagues in the House and partners outside of Congress in urging the Senate to eliminate the filibuster once and for all. I just want to say this, Jane. The 50 Democratic senators in office right now represent 41,549,808 more people than the 50 Republican senators who filibustered all of this critical voting rights legislation. Voters delivered us the White House, the Senate, and the House. That's a clear mandate for transformative change. And if we're going to have any hope of delivering on the meaningful reforms, including climate justice, we're going to have to end the filibuster.
Is there a chance that can happen?
Well, there is a lot of pressure, partly because of the voting rights bills, to at least reform the filibuster. People who think, and you're in the movie business, so you know this, the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, movie of standing up to establishment Washington. If people think about the filibuster that way, they're just wrong. That was sort of a very idealized way of thinking about something that came out of the Jim Crow era, was used to stop civil rights legislation, and continues to be used to block everything. So there are discussions underway now to reform the filibuster, because we do have to pass the For the People Act. We do have to pass the Voting Rights Act. And there are a number of other bills. It's climate change or the filibuster. Or climate justice or the filibuster. It's voting rights or the filibuster. It's $15 minimum wage or the filibuster. So I do believe that we are working our way there, but it's not easy because we don't have all 50 Democrats ready to do that.
With the recovery package and the questions that have arisen because of the very things that you're talking about, can you help us understand what's happening in this process? How can they encourage members of Congress to support a pro-Congress recovery package that I guess would have to go through reconciliation? What can we do?
Well, I think the most important thing is to continue the pressure on the White House and on Democrats in particular, in both the House and the Senate. Sorry, Jane, my computer was about to run out of juice. So 1 second here while I plug it in. Okay. Was so that we have to show that we are not willing to move forward and compromise what we know the American people want and need for some idea of a bipartisan package. Now, I am traditionally an optimist because I'm an organizer, but I will tell you, I am not optimistic that Republicans are going to give us 10 votes, even for a slimmed down bipartisan package. Maybe I'm wrong. I would be happy to be wrong. But even with that bipartisan package, that doesn't do what we need to do. We know we need a $6 to $10 trillion investment to really take on climate change. All of the studies show that. And we need to continue the pressure on the White House and moderate Democrats in the Senate in particular. That is where it's really important to understand that if we don't deliver on what we said we would do, we can't go back to voters and say, oh, sorry, we're not tackling climate change, even though you gave us the majority in the House, the Senate, and the White House, because of some dead guy's rule named Byrd, who forces us to twist ourselves into parliamentarian pretzels to get a reconciliation package because we have to get out of the filibuster. Nobody's going to understand that. They're going to say, did you deliver to us or not? Are we taking on climate change or not? So really what we need is the pressure on moderate senators in particular, continued focus with the White House and the House and the Senate more broadly, that we need to pass this reconciliation package together, and that the reconciliation package needs to include the CPC's 5 priorities, one of which, of course, is climate.
We all watched with real concern recently. Your home state of Washington has had such record-breaking heat, really deadly heat. And I've since read that scientists have linked this to the human activity, to the climate crisis. Knowing that extreme weather like this is increasingly locked into our future, what changes need to be made, policy or otherwise, to protect our communities?
It's been horrific. There are right now today 300 fires burning in British Columbia, 24 in California, 14 in Idaho, 13 in Oregon, 4 in Washington. And if you had told me 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I moved to Seattle, that we would have 108-degree weather in Seattle, 115 in Portland, that cables would be melting, that roads would be buckling from the heat, I don't think I would have believed it. And I think most people here cannot imagine that this is happening. And so it really is absolutely infuriating when people say climate change isn't real. This is the effect of a warming planet and a complete inattention to what we need to do to preserve not only our planet, but our people. So I think that, it just addresses the urgency of actually making the kinds of changes that we're talking about. And we should all be saying over and over again, climate change is infrastructure. It absolutely is. We have to build our infrastructure and our communities to be resilient and to be prepared for the ongoing climate crisis. And so that's why when we talk about jobs, we should talk about green jobs. When we talk about infrastructure, we should talk about green infrastructure and climate resiliency. When we talk about the families plan, we should talk about ensuring that families have clean air to breathe, safe water to drink, and public lands to play in. When we talk about reforming our tax system, we should talk about ending the tax subsidies to fossil fuel companies. When we talk about EJ40, what is that? It's about making sure that 40% of investment funds go to communities on the front lines of our economic, environmental, and public health crises. And that, by the way, Jane, includes workers in fossil fuel companies. And so as we transition, I think we need to talk about this in terms of how it affects our daily lives and livelihoods, and continue to push for all of those things in this jobs and families package.
Right. And when we talk about jobs, we have to remember that women and men with children have a real hard time going to work if they're not confident that their children are being properly cared for and looked after when they go to work. In other words, childcare is exactly a critical part of an infrastructure package. Yeah,
exactly. Which is why, our 5 priorities, I can't remember if I mentioned this or not, are the care economy. And by the care economy, we mean childcare, paid leave, and long-term care. All of those go together. It is also about, and making sure that it's universal, right? Everyone needs to be able to access that. It means healthcare, that is expanding Medicare and lowering the Medicare eligibility age and adding dental, vision, and hearing so that when you become a senior, you don't have to suddenly go without the things that you need the most. It means housing investments. Again, these are good, green, renewable energy jobs. And it means a path to citizenship for our immigrant workers who have been on the front lines. And of course, it means our climate priority that we've talked much about already.
You may have heard about the secret tapes that were released last week when top Exxon lobbyists were recorded talking about how Exxon delayed aggressive climate action and fought against the science so it could keep producing oil and gas. CPC members called this shameful and are demanding big oil CEOs testify in Congress about their efforts to block the climate process. Did you see those tapes? Have you heard about that?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm proud to be one of the many progressives who are demanding immediate accountability and action. But Jane, are you surprised? I mean, I know I'm not. This is what these big oil and gas companies have been doing for years. They refuse to put people over profits. And so we have to do that, which takes me back to the need to get money out of politics and to return the power to the people in our democracy and end corruption and dominance of big money and corporate interests by eliminating the secret corporate spending in elections and just toughening lobbying and ethics laws for members of Congress and groups. And then also, just one more thing on this, we need to elect members of Congress who will fight for climate action instead of doing the bidding of these oil and gas corporations and their lobbyists. And that's where everyone listening really comes in. And we have a separate Congressional Progressive Caucus PAC that is dedicated to electing those kinds of progressives, people like me who say, nope, we're not going to take corporate PAC money. We're going to raise our money that we need through the grassroots movement. And we're going to fight for a public financing system ultimately to replace all of this.
Fantastic. Now, you've said, and we all know that it's true, that the people who are listening, the Fire Drill Friday families, need to be calling and writing their elected officials, and President Biden as well. And you said moderate Democrats, but if we're not constituents of Senator Manchin, for example, or other moderate Democrats, should we call them anyway?
I think it's useful to call them anyway. I also think that all of us can probably come up with a list of at least 10 people that are in the states that do matter, relatives, family, friends. What if everybody on Fire Drill Fridays got a list of 10, or if you're ambitious, 20 or 50 or 100 people that you can personally call in some of the states that really matter? And you might have family there, you might have friends there. Go on LinkedIn and see who you know from your college network. Maybe you can put together something from your friend network that really reaches out to those people. Let's think about expanding beyond the circle that we just operate in today. And it is also always useful to call your representative. Of course, if you know they're on board, thank them, but urge them to stay strong. It isn't always easy to stay strong. You can write to the Speaker of the House, you can write to the Senate Majority Leader, you can write to those senators who are not in your district, but make sure you tell them why their action matters to you, because you're an organizer, I'm an organizer, the personal story matters. Yeah. And that is ultimately what really can change the dial.
Yeah. I hope that the people listening realize, I know that it's a pain in the butt sometimes to do these things, but they really, really matter. I mean, it's not talked about a lot, but we ended the Vietnam War because of letters and calls to Congress. They started saying, call off your people. We can't handle it. Flood their offices with letters and mostly phone calls and texts now. It's so important. I think we have time for a few audience questions, if you don't mind. So, Matt, you have any?
Absolutely. So the first one is from Calvin on Facebook. I can only imagine the obstacles you faced. What inspired you to run for office, Congresswoman?
Well, Calvin, thank you. I was an activist. I actually never thought I was going to run for office. I was fighting initially the Bush administration after 9/11, ended up creating one of the largest immigrant advocacy organizations in the country. And then I realized, Calvin, that there were too many people that I was talking to who I felt did not actually represent me. And there weren't very many people of color in office. There weren't many women of color, women more broadly, and then women of color more specifically. There weren't immigrants in office. And so I just realized that maybe I was thinking about organizing wrong, that I had always been thinking about organizing from the outside. But what would happen if you thought about elected office as a place for organizing? And really using the platform to build the movement, to organize legislators on the inside, and to push and to be at the table. And so I ran initially for the state Senate because I wasn't sure I was going to like politics, to be frank. I wasn't sure that my theory of change was going to work. And I became the only woman of color in the state Senate at the time. And then 2 years later, ran for Congress. And I can tell you, it makes an enormous difference. If we organizers, we women of color, we immigrants were not at the table inside, I promise you things would not be even where they are. And we're still trying to build that power, both on the inside and the outside. So it's a real privilege an honor to be here and to be fighting for the things that we all really care about at the places where the decisions get made.
Thank you. The next question is from Lewis on Twitter. Is the Progressive Caucus growing? Are you recruiting new members, or do you support races with progressive candidates?
Yes, absolutely. We are growing. As I said, I think we're 96, about to be 97, and we have 2 more members that are applying, but we're also tightening our rules. So we made a decision when we introduced the rules reforms package that I worked on for a couple of years, that it may have meant that the Progressive Caucus would get smaller. But if we got smaller and we had more leverage for our votes and more ideological consonance, agreement among our members about what we were really standing for, that was okay. Now, at the same time, we're really pushing for progressive candidates to join us. So somebody like Nina Turner in Ohio, we really want Nina Turner to join us in Congress. And there are a number of people across the country. We weighed in on Melanie Stansberry's race, who won in Nevada to replace Deb Haaland. So she has just joined the Progressive Caucus. So it has been really good. But to me, it is both about the size, but it's also about how do we stick together? How do we really build that notion of what it means to be a progressive, and the ability to, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has said at different times, courage is a muscle, right? And we have to build that muscle even within the Progressive Caucus.
Yeah. And I just want to point out what the Congresswoman is saying. What she did with the Progressive Caucus is what an organizer does. She's turned what was a kind of a more relaxed social gathering conversation into a political fist, a muscle. And that's because she's an organizer, and it's made all the difference in the world. That's what you get when you get an organizer elected to office, and keep that in your mind when you think about who to vote for in the future.
That's right. That's really important, I think. And also thinking about infrastructure, right? I always call myself an infrastructure gal, in the sense that if you don't have the rules and the requirements and the procedures and the structure to support, imagine when I came into Congress, Jane, there was one staff member for all of the Progressive Caucus, one staff member. And there was no outside organization, which now exists, the Progressive Caucus Center, which you are a part of and I am a part of. We had to build that together to say, okay, now we need a group on the outside that's also helping to coordinate all the many movement groups and connect people to Congress. Mm-hmm. Those are the kinds of institutions and infrastructure that we need if we're going to leverage progressive power.
Yeah, I think now you have a staff person just on climate, in fact.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Congresswoman Jayapal, for taking time to be with us, especially after such a difficult month at home. We are beyond grateful for your leadership on climate, and we'll be following closely in the days, weeks, and months ahead. Please stay safe. We love you.
Thank you, Jane, for everything you're doing. Thank you, Fire Drill Fridays movement. We so appreciate you, and we're going to win if we hold together and we hold strong.
Thank you. It's leaders like Representative Jayapal and the Progressive Caucus that give me hope that we are finally going to wrestle our country out of the grip of those who put profit over people and build a more just and sustainable world that we all deserve, right? As you all know, here on Fire Drill Fridays, we are laser focused on getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies. It's just absolutely unacceptable to keep giving billions of taxpayer dollars to this polluting, climate chaos-inducing industry every year. We know that ending fossil fuel subsidies is a necessary step toward reducing our dependence on oil and our carbon emissions. This means we have to fight back against companies like Exxon, who are doing all they can to stand in the way of real progress. So you know the drill. To make change, you need to take action. So go to firedrillfridays.com/take action and send a message to your member of Congress to stop giving our tax dollars to oil companies who are threatening our climate. And before we go, one last thing, don't forget to join us for this month's movie night, Thursday, July 29th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Our monthly movie nights are a time for the Fire Drill Fridays family to come together virtually to watch a film with themes of climate change and activism. And this month we're watching Kiss the Ground, a documentary that unearths the truth about our industrial food system and its impact on our climate, on our planet. I'll introduce the film, I'll share our movie night cocktail, and then after the film, I'll have a special Q&A about the documentary with my friend Rosario Dawson, who is in the film, and Finney and Makepeace. I hope you'll join us for what I think is going to be a really powerful evening. Stay tuned on our channels for the information about August's show. It's good to be back with all of you. Stay safe and see you next time.